Hello and welcome to the Unsung Sport Podcast, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the sports you love. Today I'm joined by Hollie Varney, Chief Operating Officer at Kick It Out. Hollie, thank you very much for joining us.
Hi Mark, thanks for having me.
No problem. So look, I know that Kick It Out's been going for 30 years now. It's a fair time. But it did start out as an anti-racist campaign, but then transitioned into a kind of full organisation. How has that developed over the past 3 decades?
Yeah, so it started out 30 years ago now. We just celebrated our 30th anniversary this year. A couple of months ago, we launched a 30th anniversary report, which really demonstrated the impact that we've had, and I can delve into some of the findings of that. But yeah, it was really much in response to a lot of the racist abuse that players were receiving 30 years ago, and obviously that environment, we believe, has changed to an extent positively over the past few decades, but still we know there's far more work to be done. But yeah, changed our jurisdiction to be more inclusive of all protected characteristics and all issues across sport. So racism, we know, is still a big issue within football, but there's also other issues that exist in terms of disability, sexism, misogyny, and all of the other protected characteristics as well. So yeah, we wanted to expand our remit to have more impact across the game to better represent everyone that's involved in football.
Yeah, and I had a very brief look through that report actually this morning, and I think there was over 1,000 cases still that came through. But yeah, it'd be great if you could share any insights into that report.
Yeah, so we surveyed a range of football fans that had been involved in football over the past 30 years. So that was a key part of the report that we published. And some of the findings were really insightful. So one of them was around the impact that we've had. So most fans believe that there's less discrimination in the game now than there is 30 years ago. And I can delve into some of the reports that we still see. But the one that really stood out for us was the bit around reach in terms of how people perceive Kick It Out and the impact they think we've had specifically in tackling discrimination. So around 70% of fans recognised us unprompted as being an organisation that's had a role in terms of fighting discrimination in football. So that's really positive that people recognise who we are and what we do, and that we're a go-to organisation to help people that have any issues around discrimination or inclusion. And a huge range of fans believe football is more inclusive than it was before. So they were a couple of the key findings. But moving on from that, a lot of, overwhelming majority believe that there's still more work to be done, and we strongly believe that as well. Our mission is we're committed to not existing, essentially, that we hope football will one day no longer need us, but the issues that we see in football season on season still exist, and we want to play our part in driving the change. And we know that a lot of positive change has happened in football, but we still know there's a lot of issues that we see through our annual reports that we receive season on season, that there's still a lot of issues across grassroots, the professional game, and social media as well.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned about the social media side, because I think like in football, it used to be called banter in the changing room, and it was much more open.
Yeah.
And I think there was, I don't know the case, and I'm not sure if you're aware of it anyway, but I saw something on Twitter where a player was sharing that there was a separate WhatsApp group where they were being racist towards him. So, and then he found out about it. So it still exists. We know it still exists, which is terrible.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we've seen is that sort of, not excuse, but how people describe some of the conversations they're having as banter. But we always look at it in the sense of what is the intent. So are people being intentionally discriminatory, or is it just a lack of understanding of their language? And what is the impact on the person that's on the receiving end? And that's not for everyone to judge. That's based on the feelings of the person that's felt victimised or felt like they've been on the end of something quite unpleasant. So the impact and intent is always the way that we like to look at every case. Obviously there's things that are really explicit, and we all know that they're inappropriate, and we've got to drive that out of the game. But there's a huge amount of work to do around education at all levels. So some of the trends that we've seen in a grassroots perspective, starting there, because we've seen a massive spike in reports in grassroots football sort of season on season, and we've seen that again at the start of this season, bearing in mind we're only sort of 2-3 months into the season, is that there's a lot of language around disability that young people are using. There's a lot of abuse in terms of player on player abuse, and it's very much focused around that sort of early mid-teenage years in boys football, not so much an issue we see in girls football. So the trends and issues that we see on social media in terms of how people interact and what they comment, we see that play out in the grassroots game as well. So it's a societal issue which infiltrates into football, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in the human resources space actually for about 20 years, and I think so I do see that as kind of HR teams within a working environment, people really push, promote, and there's an understanding that doesn't really happen as much. But something I hadn't realised, which you've just touched upon actually, is that teenage years. So it's actually before people are getting to a working environment. So this is really spilling over from a home environment where they think that's probably okay, before realising, well, actually it's not. So yeah, I hadn't even kind of thought about the age side of it, because I think you just see the football hooligan side, people chanting at football matches, which seems to be grown men, which is terrible, which is worse. I mean, not worse, it's bad all round, but it's strange.
Yeah, it's a generational piece, isn't it? We know, from some of the young people that I work with, they're far more open-minded and inclusive than previous generations before, particularly when you look at like women's football and how the attitudes towards women's sport and women's athletes has changed. That doesn't happen with every group that you work with, and some of that is down to maybe their parents, their upbringing, the communities they're a part of. But we do know that there is lots of positive work being done, but some of the attitudes that we want to get rid of do still exist. But it comes back to that piece around banter. I think we've always spoken about at Kick It Out how football can be quite tribal at times. So when we do a lot of work around mass chanting as one example, and how it only takes one to sort of start a chant and then everyone joins in, and that's where that tribalism comes in. So depending on what you see and the behaviours you see, you're going to see that reflected throughout families and other communities. So yeah, it's difficult to understand, but we do know with that sort of young age group in particular that we see that behaviour play out in schools. So we've done a lot of work around education in schools over the past 6 months, and there's been a bit of a trend around sexist and racist language in schools, and it comes back to that point around differentiating between banter and what is actually discriminatory and abusive. So a lot more education to be done, really. That's the key driver that we see.
Yeah. I guess that's early intervention of trying to dispel that pack mentality, which seems to still exist, which is a shame. So, in terms of the kind of significant changes facing Kick It Out and its efforts to combat that, you mentioned the kind of schooling. What else are you doing?
So we're looking at different campaigns in response to some of the challenges that we see in football. So a couple of trends that we saw last season, one was around an increase in mass chants, and a lot of different mass chants, such as the Rent Boy chant at Chelsea, the Y word at Tottenham. And we also saw a massive trend in sexist chants aimed at players that might have an affiliation with a story around a partner or a female family member. So we've seen a bit of a spike in that. We've also seen a spike in sexism and misogyny, specifically on social media, aimed at those that play or work within the women's game or the men's game. So we're looking to launch an action plan and a campaign in the new year around that topic in particular. We also know that racism still makes up a huge amount of our reports, so we know that's a real challenge across the game, so grassroots, professional and online. So the Online Safety Act is a huge piece of work that we've had a lot of involvement in, so we're hoping once that really comes into play, that will drive down some of the abuse we see across all areas. Will drive down some of the numbers that we're seeing. Twitter is by far the worst in terms of the abuse that we see on social media, which probably isn't a huge surprise to most people. But education forms a huge part of everything that we're doing. So we're looking at delivering, we've just launched a resource as part of Black History Month activity that's around racism, the history, the context of it, some of the language, how it's evolved, and how people can get involved, just in terms of expanding our awareness about different communities in the UK. So we've done a piece of work with schools, and that launched to thousands of schools across the UK over the past couple of months. We did the same around sexism and misogyny pre the Women's World Cup. We also deliver a fan rehabilitative session. So when fans are found guilty of discriminatory abuse, we have a fan education manager that goes in, delivers a one-to-one session with that individual and tries to make them a bit more aware of what the impact of their language was. So it comes back to my point about impact and intent. And quite often, actually, some of the people that we speak to aren't really aware of why it was offensive as to what they said, and why there was that victim on the end of the line that was particularly upset and reported to us. So there's a whole session there around making people more aware of their behaviours. There's lots of different initiatives that we're working on season in response to some of the trends that we see.
Yeah, and if somebody has been discriminated against, what should they do?
We'll definitely report it to us. We encourage everyone to report it to us. We've already seen a massive spikes in reports this season, and we do a lot of work around promoting that across all communities so that people know that we're a go-to organisation if they want to even speak to us about something that's happened, or if they do want to make a more formal report, and we'll support them through the whole process. And also, you know, when you're reporting an issue, it's quite difficult to come forward and do that. Some people find it quite confronting. They also have to relive an experience that might have been quite traumatic and hurtful for them. They're going to have to go through that again. So we're always here to support people through that process and help advise and guide them and signpost them if we can't give them the support that they want.
And obviously we're towards the end of the year now. How many cases of discrimination have been reported to you this year, roughly?
Yeah, so we've received over 600 already, actually, and last season we had just over 1,000 for the whole season. So bearing in mind the season's only 2-3 months in terms of grassroots and professional, that's definitely a massive spike that we've seen. Whether that trend continues throughout the season is really hard to tell, because some months you see a massive spike because there's been, you know, a really high profile incident in the Premier League, for example, or there's been something that's happened in society that has triggered a response online and, you know, caused a lot of abuse on certain channels. So certain moments do impact the reports that we see month on month, but we are definitely seeing a massive increase this season compared to last season already.
Yeah, and I guess coming back to that you said about the Premier League, so when you do see something there, does that correlate to a spike in reports that you see?
Yeah, definitely. So we introduced a new metric last season to really understand a bit more about our reports and what people, how we could just delve in a little bit actually around what people's likeliness to report is. So we've got a new metric called report per incident. So for every report that we get in, it might be about the same incident. So I always use the example of Son at Tottenham. He's quite often receives verbal abuse at games. And so if someone shouts something discriminatory towards Son on a match day, that might be reported by 5 or 6 people, but that's only one incident. So we've seen a massive increase over the seasons in terms of our reporting stats, that people are becoming less tolerant of discriminatory abuse and more likely to report it. So that's something that we want to keep tracking year on year. So whilst we might see an increase in reports, we're actually seeing an increase in reports of each incident, which means that people are, you know, seeing it and going, well, that's not quite right, so I'm definitely going to report that. So that's positive to some extent, that people are standing up and making those reports, but obviously we want to drive down the amount of abuse that we're seeing as well.
And out of the 1,000 plus that reports that happened last year, how many of those lead on to a conviction, or I mean, what's the escalation there?
Yeah, so we do track all of the reports that we work on. Really difficult to give a definitive answer around the outcomes because they really vary. So some of them might not reach the hate crime threshold, in which case there wouldn't be a prosecution. Some of them will, but those processes can take months and months and months, as you know, with any sort of legal case, but they are all monitored, they are all dealt with. There is a response in terms of 3 months via the FA that people will receive, and we've done a lot of work with the FA around streamlining some of those processes when it comes to reporting. So yeah, they're all handled. It's in terms of the outcomes and the success of the cases, it depends how you define success. Yeah. But yeah, there is an outcome attached to each case that we see.
Okay, no problem. And I noticed from your own background, you've got a strong background in marketing. So is that really the key thing for you? Is just getting this message out and trying to educate people as early as possible that these behaviours are not acceptable? Yeah,
definitely. And yeah, I've always been quite passionate about engaging with the right audiences. So part of my role last year at Kick It Out was launching our new brand. So we have a new brand identity, a new vision, and we just want to be a bit more relatable to the audiences that we reach. So our ethos is all about sharing that positivity around inclusivity. So it's really easy to focus on all of the negative work we see, and that obviously is, can be disheartening, and we want to do a lot more to drive down discriminatory abuse. But actually we also, on the flip side, see a lot of really positive work in a lot of different communities, a lot of grassroots organisations that are, participation numbers have gone through the roof. We're creating new supporter groups of all diversities. So there's that really positive message that sometimes is overshadowed sometimes by the more negative side. So that's been a huge part of our brand refresh, is focusing on how do we get people to engage with us, because the positive stuff is far more easy to engage with than the negative stuff sometimes. It's just human nature, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that's a big passion point of mine and our comms team, is just reaching those new audiences and getting them involved in everything that we do, particularly on the proactive side.
Great. So, and I'm right in saying that Kick It Out's a charitable organisation.
We are, yeah. So we're an independent charity, yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of, because again, resources, you really want to get that message out as far and wide as possible. Is there any way that kind of volunteers can get involved? How can Joe Public help spread that message for you?
Yeah, so supporting us on social media, supporting any of the campaigns and messages that we share. If there's people working at clubs or grassroots clubs, we run different initiatives specifically for them. So if you work at a grassroots club, for example, we run an initiative called Grassroots Equality Charter, where we help clubs become more inclusive to represent their communities, and we give them training and resources throughout the season to support them. So yeah, definitely check out our website for people that are interested. There's loads of different resources and initiatives that people can get involved in.
Right. The reason I ask, I'm a coach for an under-12s team, and that's something I'm going to look into now. So I will go to the website and just kind of delve into that. So I'm sure others can do the same.
Yeah, brilliant.
And again, look, you're 30 years old as a business or as an organisation. Social media has come in and changed a lot. What has the impact been around the reports that have come from social media versus face-to-face?
Yeah, I think there's been this level of people hiding behind a keyboard on social media and feeling free to say whatever they like without any fear of consequences. And that's why we've played quite a key part from football's perspective in bringing in the Online Safety Act. And it's moved on considerably now, but 3 years ago, when this discussion first started, we put forward so many different recommendations around what we wanted to be featured in that Online Safety Act, and they have come to the fore now. So it's now a case of implementing those that policy piece and making sure that social media companies are held to account. But there has to be consequences, because if you were abusive to someone on the street, there's police that would be able to action that on the spot. You could make a report. It's very clear. You'd have evidence right in front of your face. With social media, you can make a report and nothing happens, because the social media companies want people on their channels. They're marketing companies, really, aren't they? They're trying to sell us stuff. Yeah. So they have to be held to account, and we're really hoping the Online Safety Act will really drive down the abuse that we see there, and it will hold them to account. So that's the key part for us, is that people are held accountable for their actions, and the whole anonymity of people posting online will be a thing of the past, hopefully, once this comes into play.
Yeah, and it always blows my mind that if I'm, as a football fan, if I share a clip of the Premier League, or if I share a song from an artist, those things can get picked up and removed straight away, but racist language doesn't. Yeah. And it just blows my mind why that is.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things we spoke about actually when we first started putting together some of the evidence around abuse. So we had a lot of victim statements of people that had shared, like footballers that had shared some of the abuse that they received on like a daily basis. And that was one of the points a lot of footballers made to us was, how can I not post a clip when I've used a song that I like and that's instantly flagged? And it's because of from our perspective, it's to do with the way everything's filtered. So because that's monetized in terms of copyrights for music, they have all of the systems set up to flag it. Whereas when we were looking at discriminatory abuse, there were some words that weren't in their filters. So, and sometimes people do get around some of the abusive words that we see on social media by including a sign, a symbol, a number. So we did quite a lot of work with the social media companies around some of the reports that we'd seen, some of the language that was becoming a bit of a pattern, and put that into their filtering system. So that's part of it. It's just it hadn't always been their focus, if you like, focus area, if you like, the discrimination side of it. So we've definitely supported on that being a priority for them.
Yeah, I know. I've got a 11-year-old boy and a 14-year-old daughter, and when they WhatsApp me, sometimes I can't understand half the language they use. So I can see why people would just use short code, and symbols, and everything, and it must be hard to pick up. I get, but they must know how to do it.
Yeah, it's hard to answer on their behalf. I mean, we've seen evidence of them being quite proactive in some areas of driving down the problem, and not as proactive in others. So it's a bit hit and miss, social media, in terms of what they see as a priority and what the rest of us might. But the Online Safety Act will definitely hold them to account, and that's really the main thing that we wanted to see, was that people can't get away with speaking as freely as they wish on social media without any consequences. So we'll see once this comes into play what the impact looks like. When
does that come in?
Well, imminently. It's already gone through all of the chains of command. It's been in process for the past, I think, nearly 3 years. It was announced an update on that over the past couple of months. So imminently.
Good. And is there anything more that the government or the FA, the governing bodies, can do to help support?
In terms of our work generally, or social media?
Do you think, are you getting enough support from government? I don't know, kind of like lobbying the social media companies as an example. Are you supported from above?
We work really closely with all of the football authorities, so the likes of the Premier League, the EFL, the FA, the PF, all of the abbreviations, which is really hard when you're trying to induct new people, trying to get them to grips with what they actually stand for. We work with all of the football authorities. We receive funding from some of them as well. We do want to be more financially independent, so that we have, we've always wanted to have our own independent voice, and we do, but we almost want to step away from being solely funded by football into being more commercially driven. That gives us a bit more autonomy to do exactly what we want to do, in our own tone of voice as well. So our ambition really is to not just be focused on football, it's to actually, can we support other sports as well? We've sort of had a bit of a go at cricket. That was exploratory. We had an exploratory partnership with the ECB, looking at how we might be able to support them with some of the issues they've had. We know that there's not the same organisation like us in every sport, if at all. So that support in terms of tackling discrimination and promoting inclusion doesn't exist in the independent form of us across other sports. So we do feel there's a real opportunity for us to broaden some of the positive work we've done in football and translate that into other sports. So that's certainly an ambition of ours going forward.
Brilliant. That's really good. And are there any kind of key milestones, achievements that Kick It Out's particularly proud of over recent times?
Well, I think to get to 30 years, and we've grown massively over the past couple of years in particular, and to still be seen as an organisation within football, and hopefully one day other sports, that's playing a key part in tackling discrimination and promoting inclusion, is a massive positive for us. So, a lot of the work that we want to follow on from our 30th, we want to build that over the next 30 years and beyond, and just demonstrate more of an impact. So one of the key piece of work that we're looking at with all of the football authorities is, how do we become a bit more transparent in terms of the data that we share? Now, data can be a real turn-off topic for some people, but like from my marketing background, it's really key in terms of understanding, what does the representation look like across the game, and how do we make that better for people from underrepresented groups? So that is a real focus for us over the next couple of years, let alone the next 30 years. So we want to know how many people are at executive leadership levels that are from those underrepresented groups, whether they're Black, Asian, female, or have a disability. We want to know what the barriers are for some people going into refereeing. there's not been a black referee in the Premier League since Uriah Rennie. That was over 20 years ago now. So we want to know why that is and what's the blockages for those referees coming through the system. And then when you look at the women's game, why is there a lack of female coaches, and is there an opportunity for us to upskill and bring on board new female coaches to work across the top tier of the women's game? So for us, the representation piece is what's really going to trigger everything else that follows, because unless we see that, we won't know what change we're making across the game. So that's a big focus and a priority for us in the coming years.
Do you have any stats around discrimination, men's football versus women's football?
Yeah, we break down our reports by game type, so professional game, grassroots, and then women's and men's. The women's game makes up a really small percentage of our reports, and I don't know if you've been to many women's games, but if you compare your experience between going to a women's match versus a men's match, the environment is completely different. It's very positive, very family focused. You'd be happy taking kids there because there's no, from my experience, there's not as much verbal abuse and swearing and all the sort of crazy behaviour that comes with a men's game. So we don't see the same behaviours translate from the men's game into the women's game. So that means that most of our reports are predominantly from the men's game. And as I mentioned with grassroots, we see a massive spike of our reports, a massive cluster of our reports are focused on that sort of boys' teenage years. So yeah, it hasn't translated yet. The main abuse that we see in the women's game is aimed at those public, more high-profile figures that have got social media followings. So the bulk of the abuse towards women is online, from what we see.
Yeah, I've been to a couple of London Bees games, but yeah, not a huge amount. But I totally agree. The atmosphere is completely different. So, and I did take the kids actually. So, yeah, it just makes sense that it is much more family friendly. And you know, I West Ham supporter, so I go to West Ham and I go to Colchester, which is my local team. And yeah, you do hear a lot shouted out in the background, and it's how they tackle that. One thing I never see is stewards getting involved, though. Do the clubs need to instruct the stewards to try and single out people? Because I don't think I've ever seen a steward take anybody out for shouting out, because a lot of people just see shouting things out at a men's football game as part of the price of the ticket.
I guess it depends what they're shouting. It's really difficult with stewards because they're quite often contracted in, so they're hired as like agency staff essentially. So that means that the stewards, so if you're at Colchester, for example, and they get in 100 stewards, they might not be the same 100 stewards week after week. So in terms of the briefing and the training piece for them, part of what we've looked at in the past, and we're continuing to look at, because we know it's a growing problem, is how do we educate stewards when they are at a football match to know what the process is when they do see discriminatory abuse happen in front of them. Now, the clubs do their best to brief the stewards, but because they change quite often game to game, that becomes a little bit more difficult to work through. But we've also seen a lot of stewards that have been abused themselves, and it's probably similar to what you might see at a grassroots level in terms of referees being abused, because they're sort of, you know, a figure of authority within a stadium, and, you know, coming back to that tribal environment, they're also receiving quite a bit of abuse. So then there's a process to be followed there. So yeah, there's a lot more work to be done with stewards, but it's basically just about the process and how we implement it.
Yeah, and do you work at grassroots? Do a lot of work at grassroots, but do you also cover professional football as well?
Yeah, we do work across all levels of the game, both men's and women's, and then obviously review the reports and behaviours that we see online as well.
Yeah, and are you focused just in the UK, or again, is it a global organisation?
No, we haven't got ambitions to be a global organisation yet. I think we'd start with maybe having got other sports. So yeah, we work predominantly in England, across all of the English leagues, so Premier League all the way down to the grassroots level, and WSL the same, down to the grassroots level of the women's game.
Yeah, and do you have insights though as to like racism in Europe, for example, compared to the UK, and how we're doing? I'm not saying it's like a league table as such, but are we a lot better than an Italy or a Spain, or where do we sit? Yeah,
I've been asked that question a few times actually, and it's interesting. I think it's really hard to compare like for like if you're not measuring exactly the same things. So because we operate in quite a different way to other countries, it probably isn't a like for like comparison, right? But we do know that I think the issues in Spain, as one example, have been, broadcast for all to see with the whole Rubiales incident at the Women's World Cup, and just some of the challenges they've had around Vinny Jr., for example, and the abuse he's received. So I think from what we know and some of the insight we've seen and we have access to, we think English football is a bit more ahead of other European countries, including the likes of France, Italy, Spain. They have a much longer way to go than we do in terms of how they deal with issues of discrimination. We have a really robust process in place via the work we do, but also the FA's systems. That isn't the same in the other countries. It's not quite as detailed or thorough, which is why you see those issues keep reoccurring week on week, particularly in the Spanish leagues. But Germany do some really great work. We've actually done quite a lot of cross-learning with the likes of Borussia Dortmund. We did a study trip to Germany and took all of the football authorities over there earlier this year, and we did a return trip, so brought the German delegation here. And some of the work they've done is really forward-thinking, particularly around anti-Semitism and how they deal with safety in their stadium. So there's always things you can learn from other countries and other leagues, but really hard to know who's almost the best at it without seeing all of the data across every country, every league, and all of the processes and systems, which would be a mammoth piece of work, but would be quite interesting.
And obviously you're a big football fan yourself. You coach a girls' team, is that right, or a women's team?
Yep, I coach at Welling United, so in South East London. I support Charlton for my sins. They've not had the most success in recent years, but the women's team are doing pretty well. I think they're sitting top of the championship at the moment, which is really positive. But so I'm really passionate about the women's game. There wasn't, when I was younger, a teenager, there was hardly anywhere to play football as a girl, and it wasn't really encouraged. There was a lot of stigma around wanting to play sport and be a girl, particularly in schools. I mean, some of the attitudes from PE teachers was go and play netball. That seemed to be the only suitable sport for girls when I was growing up. But I just love seeing all of the girls taking part. I have like 17 in my squad, but at Welling as a club, we've got over 100 girls taking part. There's thousands of girls playing football every week. Participation has gone through the roof since the success of the Lionesses. So part of what I'm really interested in, and especially with some of the work we're doing at Kick It Out, is actually with that participation through the roof, how do we diversify what we're seeing in the first team? That's obviously a key part of discussions that we've seen. But how do we also improve the pathways to the professional game? At the moment, it's not as consistent as what you see in the men's game in terms of how you actually get through the steps to becoming a professional footballer, and there isn't the levels of investment either in the women's game that we see in the men's. So hoping that NUCO are able to drive some of that new investment, but really positive in terms of what I've seen, and the environment is really positive in girls football as well, from what I've seen as well. But it's just amazing seeing so many girls playing football.
Yeah, we definitely see a lot more investment. Again, we've come a long way from the Bend It Like Beckham days, which I think like the first time you ever saw girls play football on screen, really. And there is a lot of money going in, and I think we're starting to see, not in the UK, it's good in the UK, but I think there's some of the international players, I think it's US get paid the same as male in terms of international.
Yeah.
Do you think that will follow globally elsewhere, or is it just down to each federation?
I think it will potentially. I think it's really difficult to say. So from my perspective, I look at this quite logically in terms of we can't bring the women's game up to the same level of the men's game overnight. This is going to take 10, 20 years maybe to get that level of investment in it. It needs to be able to, pay players more effectively, play coaching staff at higher levels, and make it a bit more of an attractive career essentially for women that want to pursue that side of the game. So I do think investment is a really key part, and it's almost difficult to compare it to the men's game because it's not in the same position. Like the women's game was banned for 50 years and only reinstated in the 70s. So if you think about that journey from then to now, it's been absolutely huge. So that's really positive. So for me, it's how you bring that momentum forward. You keep driving the change, you keep increasing participation. The investment will come eventually. The more the women's game grows, the more it attracts new audiences, the more people that go and watch WSL games and the England Lionesses. So yeah, there's lots more to be done, but I think where it is at the moment is brilliant. It's just, yeah, how do we take it to that next level over the next couple of years?
Yeah, we are seeing, I think Barcelona they did I can't remember who they played. I don't know if it was Real Madrid, but they sold out the new camp for a women's game, and they said, that would never happen, but they did it, and he's going from strength to strength. We can see that globally.
Yeah, it's record-breaking attendances season on season, which is amazing. I think one of the Arsenal women's games had over 40,000 tickets sold within the first couple of weeks, and you'd never have thought that would be possible a couple of years ago. So, the ambitions are really high at the moment because it's the development and the growth has been so, almost feels like it's been overnight, but obviously this has taken years and years of hard work to get it to this point. So yeah, I think it's really exciting to see where the women's game goes next, and for the next generation of girls, like the 12, 13-year-olds that I coach, they've got aspirations to be professional players, and there's now a pathway in place for them to do that, which didn't exist to the same scale as it did 10, 20 years ago. So yeah, really positive, and yeah, just excited to see where it will actually go over the next 10, 20 years. And I think Karen Carney made a point of this in her review about it being a £1 billion industry, and some people probably laughed at that, but there is definitely an opportunity if they get the right levels of investment.
Now, Hollie, it's been brilliant. I think you've covered a lot and you shared a lot there. For anybody that wants to get involved in Kick It Out, can you just share the where they should go to and reach you?
Yeah, of course. So kickitout.org is our web address, and then if you just search Kick It Out, we're available on all the major social platforms as well, and LinkedIn from a business perspective. But yeah, just get involved, follow us, and have a look at our website for people that want to get involved in some of the work that we do.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm definitely going to follow up as well with Brooklands, which is my son's team, so I'll look into that Good. As well. So yeah, we'll see us on there. Thank you very much, Hollie. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Mark.